Hello, this is YAH'S Fire from A Mighty Wind and almightywind.com Ministries. The video I'd like to do today is a brief summary of the timeline of both Israel and Judah, starting with the reign of King David, which most scholars believe is around 1000 BC. This is considered the golden age of Israel. That would also include the reign of his son Solomon. It's important to understand the timeline of Israel and Judah. I don't know if most of you are aware that Judah and Israel had split into 10 tribes in the north, often referred to as Samaria, and 2 tribes in the south, which is both Benjamin and Judah. According to Scripture, there was after the dividing of the kingdoms, after Solomon's reign, after the dividing of the 2 kingdoms, there were no righteous kings in Israel, and there were a number of righteous kings in Judah. So, for those of you who are not aware, most scholars believe that, and I would tend to agree, that the northern kingdom completely fell apart in about 723 BC. And then about over 130 years later, the kingdom of Judah was Jerusalem. The kingdom of Judah, where Jerusalem was completely destroyed under YAH'S instrument, King Nebuchadnezzar, and they were taken captive for 70 years. When you look at the entire timeline of ancient Israel, you see that one of the reasons, the main reason for their destruction was rebellion. And this is the time where we are approaching late October, and everybody knows about the evil during this time. So this is a lesson in biblical knowledge and in history that we should all be aware of. During David's reign, he was feared around the world. David knew that without victory, that against the pagan enemies, against those that worship the Baal idols and worship pagan deities, pagan gods, that things would be extremely serious. His men would be tortured very brutally, and he knew that obedience was not really an option. He had to be obedient. He was obedient, and for all the religious counterfeits that mock David's ministry, they simply don't understand how anointed he really was. Many of the Jews understand this, and they know how anointed, they knew and still know how anointed the holy prophet David was. When he went out into battle, if you really study Scripture, you can see how great the slaughter was when he went out into battle. And there are hidden mysteries in the Scriptures that describe colossal slaughters against the enemies of Israel at the time, when they were all 12 tribes. But we know that the sins of Solomon, later his son, was one of the main reasons for the division of the 12 tribes. For those of you that are not aware of this, one of the ministry of both holy prophets Elijah and Elisha was around the late 800 BC era. I believe that is the most accurate. And I apologize that before I had said it was in the 900s, later 900s. Upon further research, I would tend to agree that it seems to line up more with the late 800s. Elijah and Elisha's ministry during the reign of a good king called Jehoshaphat, who could assemble even after this civil war and the split had taken place after Solomon's reign. Years before, under Rehoboam for Israel and Rehoboam who was the king of Judah, and Jeroboam, who was the king of Israel. A number of decades later, Jehoshaphat was king during the reign of Ahab, who was the king of Israel, and you can read about that in the book of Kings. But Jehoshaphat could assemble a 1,000,000-man army. Actually, I counted it as 980,000 men, all men of valor in all manner of war. Clearly, Judah was the most mighty force upon the planet, and yet Jehoshaphat and the holy priests and holy prophets still laid their faces prostrate as they were in warfare, as you could see when they were in warfare against Edom, Moab, and Mount Seir. It's an awesome history, and there's really no history like that of Israel. I believe that the holy Hebrews, the holy Jews, are the ones that have preserved history, established history, have established many advances in science, medicine, linguistics, meaning languages, especially during the golden era of Israel. During the Israeli alliance with Phoenicia, you can read about it in the scriptures when Solomon had made an alliance with Phoenicia. They were experts of sailing the seas of the entire world, and this should be common knowledge, but sadly it is not. The Phoenicians are the ones that were given the credit of understanding the trade winds and the different astronomy, understanding how to guide through astronomy. I'm not talking about astrology, which is witchcraft. We're talking about basic astronomy and the use of science to help navigate around the world, and they were experts at this. And the Jews would and with the sometimes with the Phoenicians would literally sail the world, and they had the skills and the technology to do it back in the ancient era. But you don't hear about this because the Roman system and other pagan systems simply will never give the Jews any real credit. They refuse to acknowledge that. Actually, what they often do is they'll take from the Jewish people and take credit for the advances that Yahweh has given to the Jewish people in so many areas of life. But this is just a basic timeline that I wanted to cover for everybody. Again, you can see the destruction of the temples, of the temple at Jerusalem, according to this timeline. Jerusalem was destroyed. Like I say, most scholars think it was destroyed in 586 BC. And they were in captivity for 70 years. They returned at around 516 BC with prophet Ezra, and then the temple was rebuilt.